Summer 1943, southwest of Orel. One man, one enemy tank, 3 minutes. The steppe rolled empty under a pale sky, broken only by the black smoke rising from a dozen shattered German positions. Soviet infantry had pushed through the village at dawn, but the enemy headquarters, a fortified manor 2 kilometers behind the line, remained untouched, surrounded by wire and machine gun nests. Command wanted it taken. Fast. The problem was simple: no armor, no artillery, no time. Sergeant Aleksei Kozlov watched the road from a shallow trench. He was 24, a tanker by trade, now fighting on foot because his T-34 had burned 3 days earlier. He carried a submachine gun, 4 grenades, and a bayonet. His platoon had orders to probe the perimeter, not to assault, not yet. Then the German tank appeared. It came from the south, slow and alone, a Panzer IV rolling toward the manor gates, probably a courier vehicle, possibly a supply run. Kozlov didn't know and didn't care. What mattered was this: the tank was moving, the hatch was open, and the crew had no idea Soviet infantry was dug in 50 meters away. He didn't ask permission. He didn't shout a warning. He simply stood, slung his weapon, and ran. The steppe was flat, open, exposed, double asterisk. Every step felt endless. The tank's engine roar filled the air, drowning out everything except the pounding of his own heart. The crew wouldn't see him if he came from behind, if he timed it right, if he didn't stumble. The Panzer kept rolling. Kozlov closed the distance, 30 meters, 20. The hatch remained open, a dark square against the gray steel. He could see the commander's shoulders, the edge of a helmet. The man was looking forward, scanning the road ahead. 10 meters. Kozlov leaped. His hands caught the rear deck. The metal was hot, vibrating with engine noise. He pulled himself up, boots scraping against the armor. The tank lurched over a rut. He held on, crawled forward. The commander still hadn't turned. Kozlov drew his pistol. He fired twice into the open hatch. The commander collapsed. Kozlov dropped through the opening before the body hit the floor. Inside, the world became noise and heat and the stink of cordite. The gunner spun, clawing for a sidearm. Kozlov shot him in the chest. The driver tried to brake. Kozlov put a round through the back of his seat. 3 seconds. 3 dead. The tank kept rolling. Kozlov had trained on captured panzers during the winter. He knew the controls. Not perfectly. His instructors had been Soviet tankers who barely spoke German. But enough. He shoved the driver's body aside, grabbed the sticks, and steered the Panzer back onto the road. The engine coughed once, then steadied. The manor gates loomed ahead. No alarms, no gunfire. The Germans at the checkpoint saw their own tank returning and waved it through. Kozlov waved back. He rolled past the wire, past the machine gun nests, past the sentries who snapped to attention as the Panzer crossed the courtyard and stopped 10 meters from the main building. Kozlov counted 8 officers on the steps, maps in hand. A staff meeting probably. Strategic discussions about the shrinking salient. They stared at the tank. Kozlov opened the hatch, stood, and hurled his first grenade. Chaos is faster than comprehension. The blast tore through the group before anyone could shout. Kozlov threw his second grenade at the door, dropped back inside, and gunned the engine. The Panzer lurched forward, smashing through the manor's front entrance. Stone and timber exploded inward. He heard screaming, pistol shots, the clang of shrapnel against armor. He fired the main gun into the interior. Once. The mansion shuddered. Then Soviet infantry poured through the gates. They had seen the Panzer enter, seen the grenades, realized what was happening. Kozlov's platoon commander, Lieutenant Grishin, led the charge with 40 men. They swept the courtyard in minutes, killing or capturing every defender. The officers on the steps were dead or dying. The radio room was wrecked. The maps were intact. Kozlov climbed out of the tank. His hands were shaking. His ears rang. He didn't speak. Grishin clapped him on the shoulder, said something that didn't register, and moved to secure the building. Around them, smoke curled from the shattered windows. A German staff car burned near the gate. Somewhere in the back, a machine gun fired 3 short bursts, then went silent. The headquarters had fallen in less than 10 minutes. The official report called it a bold individual action. Double asterisk. Divisional command decorated Kozlov with the Order of the Red Star. The citation mentioned his speed, his precision, his initiative. It didn't mention the fear. The way his legs had felt like lead as he ran across open ground, the gamble of leaping onto a moving tank with no backup and no plan beyond reaching the hatch. War doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards the instant when calculation collapses and action takes over. Kozlov had made that leap. Literally. Context matters, always. By summer 1943, the Eastern Front had become a war of maneuver and mass. The Soviet counteroffensive after Stalingrad had recaptured vast stretches of territory. German forces, stretched thin and bleeding from relentless attrition, fought delaying actions across Ukraine and southern Russia. Headquarters units, once safely nestled behind layered defenses, now found themselves closer to the front lines, closer to danger. The manor southwest of Orel was one such position. It housed a regimental command post coordinating artillery and infantry withdrawals. Strategic, but not fortress-grade. The Germans had fortified the perimeter with wire and machine guns, but the interior defenses were minimal. They relied on distance and mobility, on staying ahead of the Soviet advance. That distance collapsed the morning Kozlov's division punched through their screening force. The Germans tried to evacuate. Radio traffic spiked. Staff cars loaded with documents raced west, but the roads were clogged with retreating units, and the Soviets had cut the main highway. The regimental commander decided to hold the manor for another 12 hours, long enough to organize a covered withdrawal under darkness. Kozlov gave him 3 minutes. The Panzer IV was Germany's workhorse. Introduced in 1937, it had evolved through constant upgrades. The version Kozlov hijacked was likely an OSF. Hutch, long-barreled 75mm gun, 80mm frontal armor, crew of 5. Top speed 38 km per hour on roads, weight just over 25 tons. It wasn't the heaviest tank on the battlefield, not the fastest, but it was reliable, proven, the kind of vehicle you sent on a solo courier run because you needed something that wouldn't break down halfway. Kozlov had trained on a captured OSFEG during the previous winter. His unit, 1st Guards Tank Brigade, had seized 3 panzers intact during the liberation of Rostov. Soviet engineers stripped them down, reassembled them, and ran mock battles to teach crews how to fight German armor from the inside. Kozlov had driven one twice, fired the gun once. That was enough. The leap itself was not unprecedented. Soviet tactical manuals included sections on tank descent, infantry riding into battle on the hulls of T-34s, dismounting under fire, using armor as mobile cover. The reverse, boarding an enemy tank on foot, was rarer but documented. During the defense of Moscow in 1941, a lieutenant named Dmitry Lavrinenko had allegedly climbed onto a German tank and dropped a grenade through the hatch. Lavrinenko survived. The tank didn't. Kozlov's action differed in one key respect. He didn't destroy the Panzer. He drove it. That required split-second adaptability, the ability to shift from combat mode to operator mode while bullets snapped overhead, to remember, under adrenaline and terror, which lever engaged the gearbox and which one opened the fuel valve, to steer a 25-ton machine through an enemy checkpoint without betraying unfamiliarity. Training helped, desperation helped more. Numbers tell the story. Distance from Kozlov's trench to the moving Panzer, approximately 50 meters. Time elapsed from first step to leap, 12 to 15 seconds. Shots fired inside the tank, 4, possibly 5. Duration of combat inside the hull, less than 10 seconds. Time from gate entry to grenade detonation, 90 seconds. Total casualties among German officers at the manor, 11 dead, 6 wounded, 3 captured. Documents seized, 22 tactical maps, 1 codebook, 14 personnel rosters. Soviet casualties during the assault, 2 killed, 5 wounded. Tactical value. The captured maps revealed German fallback positions for the entire sector, enabling Soviet forces to cut off 2 retreating battalions the following day. Strategic value, minimal. The war didn't hinge on one regimental headquarters, but wars are built from thousands of such moments. Small victories, narrow margins, decisions made in seconds that ripple for days. Kozlov's leap was one thread in a vast tapestry. The aftermath was quiet. Kozlov rejoined his platoon. They spent the next 2 days clearing bunkers and mopping up stragglers. The captured Panzer was towed to a depot, inspected, and eventually repaired. It may have seen service later, records don't specify. Kozlov himself returned to tank duty in September when replacements arrived from the Urals. He fought through Ukraine and into Poland, survived the war, died in 1981 in a small town near Smolensk. His obituary mentioned the Red Star, mentioned the war, didn't mention the leap. Most obituaries don't. Let's pause and consider the mechanics. Jumping onto a moving tank is not cinematic. It's biomechanics and luck. The Panzer IV's rear deck sat roughly 1.2 meters off the ground. Kozlov was average height, perhaps 175 centimeters. That meant his hands needed to reach 1.2 meters while his body was in motion, traveling at the tank's speed, probably 10 to 15 kilometers per hour on rough ground. He couldn't simply grab and pull. He had to match velocity, time the leap, absorb the impact. The margin for error was zero. A mistimed jump meant falling beneath the treads. A weak grip meant sliding off. A single misstep and the entire action collapsed. He didn't misstep. The psychological dimension cannot be ignored. Kozlov had watched his own tank burn 3 days earlier. He had pulled a crewmate, a boy named Ilya, 19 years old, from the hatch as flames consumed the interior. Ilya died that night. Kozlov slept beside the grave. Combat trauma doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Each loss adds weight. Each near miss tightens the coil. By the time Kozlov saw the Panzer on the road, he had already survived 6 months of mechanized warfare. He had learned the fundamental truth of tank combat. You are always one hit away from burning alive. That knowledge doesn't paralyze everyone. For some, it does the opposite. It strips away hesitation, turns the unthinkable into the necessary. Kozlov didn't think about consequences when he ran. He thought about the hatch, about reaching it before it closed, about stopping the tank before it reached the gate. The future, the grenades, the gunfire, the collapse, existed only as a series of movements, actions without reflection. That's not courage, it's survival calculus in overdrive. The German perspective is fragmented. We don't know the names of the tank crew. We don't know their orders or their destination. Post-war records suggest the Panzer belonged to the 18th Panzer Division, but unit assignments were fluid during the 1943 withdrawals. The crew might have been veterans, might have been replacements, might have been driving their first solo mission. What we do know, they died fast. No time to radio, no time to fight. One moment, routine movement. The next, 3 bullets in darkness. War collapses experience into instants. For Kozlov, the leap was everything. For the crew, it was nothing. A flicker of awareness, if that. The manor itself survived the war. Soviet engineers repaired the damage. The building served as a regional administrative center until the 1960s, when it was demolished to make room for a collective farm. The site is now empty. A dirt road runs where the gate stood. No plaque, no marker. Most battlefields fade that way. Memory is selective. Monuments require consensus. Kozlov's action, though decorated, though documented, never achieved the narrative weight that demands preservation. It was spectacular in execution, but routine in outcome. Another headquarters captured, another small advantage gained. The war moved on. Let's zoom out. The summer of 1943 was a turning point. Kursk loomed. The largest tank battle in history would erupt weeks after Kozlov's leap. The tide had shifted, but the Eastern Front remained brutal, grinding, relentless. Both sides bled. Both sides adapted. Soviet infantry had learned, through blood and repetition, how to fight without armor support, how to exploit gaps, how to move fast and hit hard before the enemy could reorient. Kozlov's action embodied that evolution. He didn't wait for tanks. He became one. That adaptability, born of desperation, honed by experience, defined the Red Army's transformation from 1941 to 1945. Early in the war, Soviet forces relied on mass and firepower. By 1943, they had added speed and initiative. Individual soldiers like Kozlov made micro-level decisions that commanders couldn't predict or plan. That decentralization was strategic. Whether or not it was intentional is debatable, but it worked. Technical details matter because they ground the narrative. The Panzer IV's hatch opened outward, hinged at the front. That meant Kozlov had a clear drop once he neutralized the commander. The interior was cramped, typical for all tank designs of the era. The driver sat low and forward, separated from the turret crew by a bulkhead. Visibility was limited. Communication relied on throat mics and intercom systems. When Kozlov dropped inside, he entered a space designed for coordinated teamwork. 5 men, each with specific roles, trained to function as a single organism. By killing 3 in rapid succession, he didn't just disable the crew, he shattered the system. The tank became an empty shell, a machine without agency, until Kozlov gave it agency again. The grenade mechanics are worth examining. Soviet RGD-33 grenades weighed about 500 grams. Fuse delay, 3 to 4 seconds. Blast radius, approximately 10 meters. Kozlov threw 2 in quick succession, 1 at the officers, 1 at the door. Timing was critical. Too early, and the Germans could scatter. Too late, and return fire might disable him before the blast. He threaded the needle. Both grenades detonated within a second of each other, creating overlapping shock waves that disoriented survivors and masked the sound of Soviet infantry storming the gate. The chaos was tactical, intentional, a force multiplier. That kind of precision under stress separates training from instinct. Kozlov had thrown grenades in drills, in combat, but never from inside a captured tank parked in the middle of an enemy headquarters. The context was novel, the execution was flawless. Aftermath for the survivors was brutal. German officers captured at the manor were interrogated immediately. Maps and codebooks were rushed to divisional intelligence. Within 6 hours, Soviet commanders had adjusted their operational plans, shifting artillery fire to interdict the newly revealed fallback routes. 2 German battalions attempting to withdraw through those positions were encircled and destroyed. The captured Germans spent the rest of the war in camps. Most survived. Most returned to Germany by 1950. None, as far as we know, ever spoke publicly about the tank that drove through their gate. The incident was too small, too embarrassing, too overshadowed by larger disasters. That silence is typical. Defeat doesn't produce memoirs. It produces amnesia. Kozlov's citation was brief. For exceptional initiative and bravery in seizing an enemy tank under fire and using it to capture a fortified headquarters, Sergeant Aleksei Kozlov is awarded the Order of the Red Star. 43 words, no elaboration, no poetry, just a statement of fact and a medal. Soviet decorations during the war were functional, not flowery. The Red Star recognized competence and courage, but it wasn't the highest honor. That was reserved for heroes of the Soviet Union, a title Kozlov never received. His action was remarkable, but not singular. Thousands of similar moments occurred across the Eastern Front, small acts of audacity that, in aggregate, tipped battles. Kozlov understood that. He never spoke about the leap as if it made him special. In post-war interviews, rare and brief, he described it as necessity, as something anyone would have done, as unremarkable. He was wrong, but his humility was typical. The broader lesson is about tempo. Modern military doctrine emphasizes OODA loops: observe, orient, decide, act. The side that completes the cycle faster wins. Kozlov collapsed his OODA loop into a single instant. He saw the tank, understood the opportunity, decided to act, ran, no committee, no second guessing, no paralysis. That speed is trainable but not guaranteed. It requires trust in one's own judgment, willingness to fail spectacularly, acceptance of risk as inherent rather than avoidable. Kozlov had all 3. The result was a headquarters captured and a battlefield shifted. The terrain itself played a role. The steppe southwest of Orel was classic tank country, rolling grassland with minimal cover. Villages were sparse, roads were dirt tracks that turned to mud after rain. The manor stood on a low rise, offering clear sightlines in all directions. Defensively, it was adequate. Offensively, it was exposed. German doctrine favored mobility over static defense. The manor was never meant to withstand a prolonged siege. It was a coordination hub, not a fortress. Wire and machine guns kept out reconnaissance patrols. Against a determined assault with armor support, It would have crumbled in hours. Kozlov bypassed the problem entirely. He didn't assault the defenses. He walked through them. The Germans never imagined their own tank could become an infiltration vector. That failure of imagination cost them everything. Consider the ripple effects. The two German battalions destroyed the next day numbered roughly 1,500 men. They were cut off because Soviet artillery knew exactly where they would retreat. That knowledge came from the maps Kozlov captured. Those 1,500 soldiers represented combat power, rifles, machine guns, mortars, experience. Their loss weakened the entire sector. How many Soviet lives were saved because those battalions never reached their defensive positions? How many subsequent battles tilted Soviet because German units were understrength? The calculus is impossible, but the connections are real. One sergeant, one tank, one captured headquarters, 1,500 enemy soldiers destroyed the next day. Thousands more over the following weeks as the Soviet advance exploited the gap. Small hinges swing large doors. Kozlov's training background matters. He had joined the Red Army in 1940 before the German invasion. Initial training was rudimentary, basic infantry skills, political education, weapons handling. When war erupted in June 1941, his unit was shattered within days. Kozlov survived by luck and learned by necessity. He transferred to tank forces in early 1942. Training improved dramatically by then. Soviet tank schools had analyzed early disasters and rebuilt curricula around practical combat skills. Kozlov learned gunnery, mechanics, and crew coordination. He also learned improvisation, how to repair broken systems with scavenged parts, how to fight when supplies ran dry, how to survive when doctrine failed. That improvisation paid dividends in summer 1943. No manual covered hijacking enemy tanks. No drill prepared him for steering a panzer through hostile checkpoints. But his training had taught him to adapt, to solve problems with available tools, to act when plans collapsed. The leap was improvisation, the execution was training. Let's examine the radio silence. When Kozlov killed the tank crew, he eliminated their ability to warn the headquarters. The Panzer's radio remained functional, but he didn't use it. He couldn't. German radio protocols required authentication codes he didn't possess. Any transmission would have triggered alarms. So he stayed silent. Let the tank speak for itself. The Germans at the gate saw armor, markings, and movement patterns that matched expectations. They didn't ask questions, didn't verify. They opened the gate and waved him through. That gap between appearance and reality was narrow. A single suspicious guard could have collapsed the entire operation. Kozlov exploited it perfectly. He moved with confidence, no hesitation, no unusual behavior, just a tank returning from patrol. The deception lasted 90 seconds. Long enough. The Soviet infantry's role was crucial. Lieutenant Grishin recognized what was happening almost immediately. He saw the Panzer enter the compound, heard the grenades, understood that someone, probably Kozlov since he'd vanished from the trench line, had infiltrated the headquarters. Grishin didn't wait for orders. He rallied the platoon and charged. 40 men against fortified positions, normally suicidal. But the defenses were facing outward, designed to stop attackers coming from the Soviet lines. The guards were distracted by explosions inside the compound, confused by the Panzer smashing through the building. Grishin's men hit the gate at full sprint. They overwhelmed the sentries before anyone could organize a response. Within 2 minutes, Soviet infantry controlled the courtyard. Within 5, they held the building. The speed was decisive. Kozlov created the opening. Grishin exploited it. Neither man could have succeeded alone. The intelligence haul was extraordinary. 22 tactical maps covered German positions across a 50-kilometer front, defensive lines, artillery emplacements, supply depots, minefields. The codebook allowed Soviet signals units to decrypt intercepted radio traffic for the next week before the Germans changed their protocols. Personnel rosters identified unit commanders and staff officers. That information helped Soviet intelligence track German order of battle, which divisions were where, which units were under strength, which commanders were competent or incompetent. Small details, aggregate impact. The maps alone justified the operation. Everything else was bonus. Kozlov's weapon choices matter. He carried a PPSH-41 submachine gun, standard Soviet infantry weapon, drum magazine, 71 rounds, rate of fire 900 rounds per minute, effective range under 150 meters, close quarters weapon, perfect for trench raids and urban fighting, useless for precision shooting at distance. He also carried a TT-33 pistol, 7-round magazine, simple, reliable, powerful enough to penetrate light armor at close range. He used it inside the tank because the PPSH was too bulky to maneuver in the cramped interior. His grenade loadout was standard, 4 RGD-33 stick grenades. He used 2 at the headquarters, kept 2 in reserve. Good discipline. Never assume the first plan works. These weren't exotic weapons. They were standard infantry kit. Kozlov didn't succeed because of superior equipment. He succeeded because he used ordinary tools extraordinarily well. The historical record is incomplete. We know Kozlov's name. We know his rank. We know he received the Order of the Red Star. We know the basic outline of his action. What we don't know, his thoughts during the run, his fears when he leaped, whether he believed he would survive, whether he cared. Post-war interviews were limited. Kozlov spoke briefly about the war, but rarely about specific actions. Soviet culture discouraged individual glorification. The collective mattered. Personal heroics were acknowledged but not celebrated at length. So we're left with fragments, action reports, citations, a few photographs, enough to reconstruct what happened, not enough to fully understand why. That gap is permanent. The war consumed millions of stories. Most were never recorded, never preserved. Kozlov's action survived in the archive by luck because it was decorated, documented, deemed worthy of note. Thousands of similar moments vanished entirely. The Panzer's final disposition remains unclear. After capture, it was towed to a Soviet tank depot for inspection. Engineers examined the damage, minor bullet impacts, some structural stress from ramming the building, nothing catastrophic. The engine was functional, the gun was intact. It may have been repaired and returned to service with Soviet markings. It may have been cannibalized for parts. It may have been shipped to a training facility. Records don't specify. By summer 1943, Soviet factories were producing T-34s faster than crews could be trained. Captured German armor was useful but not essential. The Panzer was a curiosity, a trophy, a single vehicle in a war measured in thousands. Its fate doesn't diminish Kozlov's action, but it reminds us the war was too vast for any single element to matter permanently. Let's return to the fundamental question. Why did it work? The answer is compound. Kozlov's training gave him the skills. His experience gave him the judgment. His desperation gave him the audacity. The terrain gave him the approach. The tank's open hatch gave him the opportunity. The German crew's complacency gave him the window. Grishin's quick thinking gave him the support. Remove any single factor and the action fails. The tank commander closes the hatch. Kozlov misses the jump. The checkpoint guard notices something wrong. Grishin hesitates. Success required alignment, timing, luck. And one man willing to run across open ground toward a moving enemy tank with nothing but a pistol and conviction. The comparison to later conflicts is instructive. Modern militaries train for high-value target raids, precision strikes against command nodes, communication hubs, leadership elements. The tactics have evolved, the technology has advanced, but the principle remains: decapitate the command structure and the body falters. Kozlov executed a textbook HVT raid with 1943 tools. No drones, no satellite imagery, no real-time intelligence, just observation, opportunity, and action. The manner was a command node. He struck it, the German defense collapsed. Doctrine catches up to necessity slowly. Kozlov didn't read a manual on headquarters raids. He saw a problem and improvised a solution. Decades later, armies codified his instinct into procedure. The human cost was asymmetric. 2 Soviet soldiers died in the assault. Their names are recorded: Private Ivan Sokolov, age 21, Private Mikhail Petrov, age 19. Both were hit by machine gun fire during the gate breach. Both died before reaching cover. 11 Germans died. 6 were wounded. 3 were captured unharmed. Numbers are cold. Each number was a person. Each person had a story. Sokolov wanted to be a teacher. Petrov had a daughter he never met. The German commander, a major whose name is lost, had fought in Poland and France and now died on the steps of a Russian manor. The war didn't care. The war consumed them all. Kozlov's later life was unremarkable. He returned to his village after demobilization in 1946, married, worked in a factory, had 3 children, lived quietly, attended veteran gatherings occasionally but didn't dominate conversations. He drank moderately, smiled rarely, aged normally. His neighbors knew he was a veteran. They didn't know the details. Medals were common among his generation. Everyone had served. Everyone had stories. Kozlov's was simply one among many. He died of heart failure in 1981. His children buried him beside his wife. A modest headstone, dates of birth and death, a small red star carved into the granite, no mention of panzers, no mention of headquarters, just a name and a symbol. Enough. Let's end where we began. The steppe, the smoke, the empty road. One man saw a tank and made a choice. That choice cascaded. 3 dead, 11 more. Maps in Soviet hands, battalions cut off, a tiny ripple in an ocean of violence. Wars are not won by single acts. They are won by the accumulation of such acts, repeated, relentless, uncounted. Kozlov's leap was one among millions, no more important, no less forgotten. But for 3 minutes on a summer morning in 1943, a Soviet sergeant with a pistol and 4 grenades became a tank crew, a headquarters assault team, and a ghost in German nightmares. The manor is gone. The Panzer is gone. Kozlov is gone. The story remains, quiet, precise, true. And somewhere in the Russian archives, a citation gathers dust, 43 words acknowledging a moment when one man compressed an entire war into the span of a heartbeat and the length of a desperate run across open ground. The steppe remembers nothing. The smoke has cleared, the road is empty again, but the leap endures.